The fever had already stolen 3 weeks of her life when Lydia Graham heard the knock at her door. So faint she thought it might be another hallucination brought on by the sickness that had her trembling beneath every quilt she owned in the middle of an Arizona summer. Winslow was not a town that concerned itself with the welfare of a seamstress living alone at the edge of respectability, taking in mending work from the saloon girls and the ranchers' wives alike, asking no questions about the torn hems or the bloodstains that sometimes appeared on the shirts she was paid to repair. Lydia had learned to keep to herself in the 2 years since she had arrived on the westbound train, fleeing a past in Missouri that still sometimes woke her in the night with her heart pounding against her ribs. She had no family here, no close friends, only the endless work that kept her fingers busy and her mind from wandering into dangerous territory. When the illness had struck her down in late July of 1883, she had simply stopped appearing at the general store, stopped collecting the mending that was usually left for her at the boarding house, and no one had come looking. The knock came again, firmer this time, and Lydia tried to call out, but her throat was so dry that only a whisper emerged. She had not eaten in days, could not remember the last time she had managed to keep down more than a few sips of water from the pitcher beside her bed. The room spun when she tried to lift her head from the pillow, and she fell back with a small sound of defeat. The door opened anyway. She heard the creak of the hinges, the hesitant footsteps on the rough wooden floor of her small cabin. Through the haze of fever, she saw a shape, tall and broad-shouldered, backlit by the harsh afternoon sun that made her eyes water. "Madam?" The voice was deep, concerned, with the particular drawl of someone who had spent his whole life under the western sky. "Miss Graham, I am coming in. You have not been seen in town for near a month now." Lydia wanted to tell him to leave, that she needed no charity, no pity, but the words would not come. She watched as the man moved closer, his features resolving into focus as her eyes adjusted. He was young, perhaps 25 or 26, with dark hair that curled slightly at the collar of his dusty work shirt and eyes the color of the Arizona sky just before dawn. His face was tanned and weathered from outdoor work, with a strong jaw that was currently set in a line of worry as he looked down at her. "Lord have mercy," he said quietly, setting down a covered pot he had been carrying. "You are burning up." He moved with surprising gentleness for someone so large, touching the back of his hand to her forehead and then her cheek. His fingers were calloused, but his touch was careful, and Lydia felt something in her chest constrict at the simple kindness of it. She could not remember the last time anyone had touched her with such concern. "I brought soup," he said, as if this explained everything. "My mother makes it for sickness. Chicken and vegetables with herbs. Can you sit up at all?" Lydia tried. She truly did, but her body would not obey. The cowboy watched her struggle for a moment before making a decision. He disappeared from view, and she heard him moving around her small cabin, the sound of water being poured, the clink of a spoon against pottery. When he returned, he had pulled her only chair close to the bed and held a steaming bowl in his large hands. "My name is Marcus Garrett," he said, as though they were meeting at a church social instead of in her sick room where she lay weak and helpless. "I work at the Double R Ranch about 5 miles north of town. I have been seeing you around Winslow for the past year or so, though I do not suppose you have noticed me much." He spoke as he worked, propping her up with surprising care, his arms strong beneath her shoulders. Lydia wanted to protest, to maintain some shred of dignity, but she was so weak and he was so matter-of-fact about it all that she found herself allowing it. The first spoonful of soup touched her lips, and she tasted salt and herbs and something else, something that spoke of care and attention and a mother who knew how to heal. "Slow now," Marcus said when she tried to take too much too fast. "Your stomach needs to remember what food is." He fed her half the bowl before she turned her head away, exhausted by even that small effort. Marcus set the bowl aside and eased her back down onto the pillow, then stood and looked around the cabin with a critical eye. Lydia watched him through half-closed lids, too tired to feel embarrassed by what he must be seeing. The cabin was small, just one room with her bed in the corner, a table and two chairs, a stove that she used for cooking and heat in the winter. Her sewing supplies were stacked neatly on a shelf, bolts of fabric and spools of thread organized with the precision that her work required. But there were dishes in the basin that had not been washed, and dust on every surface, and the air was stale and close. Marcus moved to the window and pushed it open, letting in a breeze that felt like heaven against Lydia's fevered skin. Then he went to the stove, and she heard him building up the fire, pumping water from her small hand pump into her kettle. He worked quietly, efficiently, like a man who was accustomed to taking care of things. "I will be back tomorrow," he said, when he finally returned to her bedside. "Same time. You need to eat, Miss Graham. You need to keep your strength up." Lydia tried to ask why he would do this for her, but the fever was pulling her back down into darkness and the words tangled on her tongue. She felt his hand on her forehead one more time, gentle and cool, and then she heard his footsteps retreating, the door closing softly behind him. She slept deeply for the first time in weeks, and when she woke it was dark outside, and she was not sure if the cowboy had been real or just another fever dream. But the next day, at the same time when the sun was high and hot, the knock came again at her door. This time Lydia managed to call out, her voice hoarse but audible, and Marcus Garrett entered with another covered pot in his hands and a small smile on his face that made him look younger, less careworn. "Good afternoon, Miss Graham," he said, as though this were a perfectly normal social call. "I hope you are feeling somewhat better today." She was, though only marginally. The fever still had her in its grip, but the soup from yesterday had stayed down, and she had managed to drink some water during the night. Marcus went through the same routine as before, pulling the chair close, helping her to sit up, feeding her spoonfuls of soup with a patience that astounded her. This time it was beef and barley, rich and nourishing, and Lydia felt strength seeping back into her body with each swallow. "Why are you doing this?" she managed to ask between bites, her voice scratchy and weak. Marcus considered the question as he stirred the soup, his blue eyes thoughtful. "Because you need help," he said simply. "And because no one else is doing it. You do not know me." "No, madam, I do not. But I know you are a good woman who works hard and keeps to herself and does not deserve to die alone in this cabin because the town is too busy or too indifferent to check on you." The bluntness of his words struck her, and Lydia felt tears prick at her eyes. She turned her head away, not wanting him to see, but Marcus just waited patiently until she composed herself and then offered her another spoonful of soup. "I have been noticing you are gone," he continued, his voice gentle now. "I come into town most Saturday afternoons to pick up supplies for the ranch, and I have been seeing you walking to the general store or sitting on your porch with your sewing. 3 weeks ago, you were not there. Last week, you were still not there. I asked at the store, and Mrs. Henderson said you had not picked up your mending in a month. I figured something was wrong." "Most people would not have bothered to find out," Lydia said quietly. Marcus shrugged, a ripple of muscle beneath his worn cotton shirt. "I am not most people, I suppose." He stayed longer that day, washing the dishes that had piled up in her basin, sweeping the floor, bringing in fresh water from the town pump 2 streets over. Lydia protested weakly, but he ignored her, moving through her small space with a quiet competence that spoke of a man who was used to managing his own household. When he finally left, the cabin felt cleaner and brighter, and Lydia felt something unfamiliar stirring in her chest. Hope, perhaps, or maybe just gratitude. It had been so long since anyone had cared whether she lived or died. The pattern continued. Every day, Marcus Garrett appeared at her door with soup in hand, each one different from the last: vegetable and bean, potato and leek, chicken with dumplings that melted on her tongue. He never came empty-handed, and he never acted as though this were some great sacrifice on his part. He simply came, fed her, tidied her cabin, and left, always with the promise that he would return tomorrow. Slowly, achingly slowly, Lydia began to recover. By the end of the first week, she could sit up on her own. By the end of the second, she could stand and walk a few steps before needing to rest. The fever broke on the 9th day that Marcus came, leaving her weak and wrung out but clear-headed for the first time in nearly a month. Leo. She woke that morning with her nightgown soaked through with sweat, her sheets damp, but her head felt light and clear, and the terrible burning in her blood had finally subsided. When Marcus arrived that afternoon, she was sitting in her chair by the window, dressed in a clean frock and with her hair braided down her back. He stopped in the doorway, his eyes widening slightly, and then a slow smile spread across his face that made her heart do something complicated in her chest. "Miss Graham," he said, and there was genuine pleasure in his voice. "You look considerably improved." "Thanks to you," Lydia said, and was surprised to find her voice steady. "I do not know how to repay you, Mr. Garrett. You have saved my life." Marcus crossed to her, setting down the pot of soup, and crouched beside her chair so that they were at eye level. This close, she could see the fine lines at the corners of his eyes, the small scar on his chin, the way his hair fell across his forehead. He smelled of leather and horses and sunshine, clean and masculine, and Lydia found herself leaning slightly toward him without meaning to. "You owe me nothing," Marcus said firmly. "I did not do this expecting repayment. I did it because it was the right thing to do, and because I could not stand the thought of you suffering alone." "Still," Lydia said softly, "I am grateful." Something passed between them in that moment, something unspoken but powerful. Marcus held her gaze, and Lydia saw something in his eyes that made her breath catch. Interest, warmth, the beginning of something that could become so much more if they let it. Marcus was the one who looked away first, standing and clearing his throat. "Well then," he said, his voice slightly rough, "I have brought chicken and rice today. Are you feeling up to eating at the table?" They shared the meal together, sitting across from each other at Lydia's small table, and for the first time they talked about more than just her health. Marcus told her about the Double R Ranch, about the cattle drives and the long days in the saddle, about the men he worked with, and the landscape he loved. His father had been a cowboy too, he said, and had died in a stampede when Marcus was 15. His mother had remarried a year later to a kind man who ran the livery in Winslow, and Marcus had been raised between the ranch and the town, learning both worlds. "And you?" he asked, his blue eyes curious but kind. "How did you come to be in Winslow? You have the sound of Missouri in your voice." Lydia hesitated, old fear rising in her throat. But Marcus had earned her trust, had quite literally kept her alive, and she found herself wanting to tell him. "Not everything, not yet, but enough. I was married," she said quietly, watching his face for judgment. "Back in Independence. My husband was not a good man. He drank, and when he drank, he became violent. One night I fought back, and I hurt him badly enough that I knew I had to leave before he recovered. I took what money I had saved and bought a ticket on the first train heading west. I ended up here." Marcus listened without interrupting, his expression grave. When she finished, he reached across the table and covered her hand with his, a gesture so simple and yet so powerful that Lydia felt tears threatening again. "I am glad you got away," he said quietly, "and I am glad you ended up here. Are you?" The question came out before she could stop it, too vulnerable, too revealing. Marcus's thumb stroked across her knuckles, a touch so gentle it made her ache. "Yes," he said simply, "I am." After that day, something shifted between them. Marcus continued to come every afternoon, but now he stayed longer, and they talked about everything and nothing. He brought her books from his mother's collection, knowing she was bored with her convalescence. He helped her back to her sewing, sitting patiently while she worked on simple projects, rebuilding her strength and her skill. Sometimes he brought his own work, mending tack or oiling leather, and they sat together in comfortable silence, two people slowly learning each other's rhythms. Lydia felt herself growing stronger every day, and with that strength came an awareness that both thrilled and terrified her. She was falling in love with Marcus Garrett. It was there in the way her heart lifted when she heard his knock at the door, in the way she found herself watching him when he was not looking, memorizing the way he moved, the sound of his laugh, the kindness in his eyes. She had never felt this way about anyone, certainly not about her husband, who she had married more out of desperation and social pressure than any real affection. This was different. This was real, and it scared her more than anything had scared her in a long time. By the third week, Lydia was well enough to walk into town, though Marcus insisted on accompanying her, his hand steady at her elbow. She had lost weight during her illness, and her dresses hung loose on her frame, but her color was good, and her step was growing steadier each day. They walked slowly down the dusty main street of Winslow, past the general store and the bank and the saloon, and Lydia was acutely aware of the looks they were getting. A woman who lived alone at the edge of respectability, walking arm in arm with a young cowboy. The town would talk, was probably already talking. Marcus seemed unconcerned. He nodded politely to the people they passed, tipped his hat to Mrs. Henderson at the general store, and helped Lydia select the supplies she needed to restock her pantry. When old Mr. Morrison from the bank gave them a disapproving look, Marcus met his gaze steadily until the older man looked away. "Let them talk," Marcus said as they walked back to her cabin, their arms laden with packages. "I do not care what they think." "But I do," Lydia said, more sharply than she intended. "I have worked hard to build a respectable life here, Marcus. I cannot afford to lose that." Marcus stopped walking, turning to face her. The Arizona sun was setting behind him, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, and his face was in shadow. "What are you saying, Lydia?" It was the first time he had used her given name, and the sound of it on his lips made her stomach flutter, but she forced herself to be practical, to think with her head instead of her heart. "I am saying that you have been very kind to me, and I will always be grateful for what you have done. But people are starting to notice, and if you continue to visit me every day, my reputation will be ruined. No one will bring me their mending if they think I am a woman of loose morals." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, his jaw tight. Then he set down the packages he was carrying and took her free hand in both of his. "Then I will make my intentions clear," he said, his voice low and intense. "I am not visiting you out of charity, Lydia Graham. I am visiting you because I have come to care for you, more than I have ever cared for anyone. If the town wants to talk, let them talk about how Marcus Garrett is courting the finest woman in Winslow, with the intention of making her his wife if she will have him." Lydia stared at him, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. "Marcus, you cannot mean that. You barely know me." "I know enough," he said firmly. "I know you are strong and brave and kind. I know you survived something terrible and built a new life from nothing. I know you have a laugh that makes me want to hear it again and again, and a way of looking at things that makes the world seem brighter. I know that caring for you these past weeks has been the most meaningful thing I have done in my life, and the thought of not seeing you every day makes me feel like I cannot breathe properly. Marcus." His name came out as a whisper, and Lydia felt tears streaming down her face without her permission. "I am not asking you to answer me now," Marcus continued, his thumbs brushing away her tears with infinite gentleness. "I know this is sudden, and I know you have been hurt before, but I want you to know my intentions. I want everyone to know my intentions. I want to court you properly, Lydia, and if you will allow it, I want to marry you and spend the rest of my life making you happy." Lydia could not speak. She could only nod, and then she was in his arms, her face pressed against his chest, his strong arms wrapped around her, as though he could shield her from everything that had ever hurt her. He smelled like sunshine and safety, and Lydia felt something break open inside her, some hard shell she had built around her heart cracking wide and letting in the light. "Is that a yes to courting?" Marcus asked, his voice muffled in her hair. "Yes," Lydia managed, laughing through her tears. "Yes, you stubborn, Wonderful man, yes. The town did talk, of course. Within a week, everyone in Winslow knew that Marcus Garrett was courting Lydia Graham, and opinions were divided. Some thought it was romantic, the cowboy who had nursed the seamstress back to health and fallen in love with her in the process. Others thought it was scandalous, too fast, too public, too much. But Marcus and Lydia paid them no mind. They were too busy discovering each other, learning the thousand small details that make up a life. Marcus took her riding on Sundays, mounting her on a gentle mare from the Double R, and leading her out into the desert where the red rocks rose like cathedrals and the sky went on forever. Lydia had never been much of a rider, but with Marcus beside her, patient and encouraging, she learned to love the freedom of it, the wind in her hair, and the powerful animal beneath her. They would ride to some shaded spot where a creek ran or trees offered respite from the sun, and there they would spread a blanket and share the lunch that Marcus's mother had packed for them, talking for hours about everything under the sun. Lydia learned that Marcus loved poetry, which surprised her. He would recite Longfellow and Whitman from memory, his deep voice giving the words a music that made her shiver. He loved the land with a fierce passion, could read the weather in the clouds and find water where there seemed to be none. He wanted to have his own ranch someday, a small spread where he could raise horses and cattle and build a life. He had been saving his wages for years, living frugally, planning for a future that had seemed distant and abstract until now. Marcus learned that Lydia had wanted to be a teacher once, before her marriage had ended that dream. She was educated beyond what was common for women of her station, the daughter of a schoolmaster who had taught her Latin and mathematics, along with the traditional feminine accomplishments. She loved books and learning, and in another life, another world, she might have done something remarkable with that love. But she had made her choices, or had them made for her, and now she was here making the best of things. You could still teach, Marcus said one afternoon as they sat by a creek, watching the water flow over smooth stones. When we have children, you could teach them, and maybe other children too if you wanted. We could build a schoolhouse on our land. Our land, Lydia repeated softly, testing the words. You speak as though it is already decided. Marcus looked at her, his blue eyes serious. Is it not? Lydia reached out and took his hand, twining her fingers through his. I am afraid, she admitted. I was married before, and it was terrible. What if I am not any good at being a wife? What if I cannot make you happy? Marcus raised her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles, a gesture so tender it made her heart ache. You make me happy just by existing, he said simply. Everything else we will figure out together. And I promise you, Lydia, I will never be like him. I will never raise my hand to you in anger. I will never make you feel small or afraid. I would rather cut off my own arm than hurt you. I know, Lydia said, and realized it was true. She did know. Marcus had shown her every day through his actions what kind of man he was. Gentle, patient, strong without being domineering, kind without being weak. He was everything she had not known she was looking for, everything she had not dared to hope existed. Then trust me, Marcus said. Trust us. Trust that this is real and good and worth the risk. I do, Lydia whispered, and leaned forward to kiss him for the first time. His lips were warm and soft against hers, careful at first, as though he were afraid she might break. But when she pressed closer, her hand coming up to cup his jaw, Marcus deepened the kiss, his arm coming around her waist to pull her against him. It was nothing like the rough, demanding kisses her husband had forced on her. This was exploration, conversation, a question and an answer all at once. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Marcus rested his forehead against hers and smiled. I have been wanting to do that since the first day I saw you sitting on your porch with your sewing in your lap and the sunset in your hair, he said. Then why did you wait so long? Lydia asked, her voice teasing. Because I wanted to do it right. I wanted you to know me and to trust me and to want it as much as I did. I do want it, Lydia said. and kissed him again to prove it. They were married in September, 3 months after Marcus had first knocked on her door with soup in his hands and determination in his heart. It was a small ceremony at the church in Winslow, with Marcus's mother and stepfather standing as witnesses and a few curious townspeople filling the pews. Lydia wore a dress of cream-colored silk that she had sewn herself with lace at the collar and cuffs, and Marcus wore a new suit that his mother had insisted on buying him. He looked uncomfortable in the formal clothes, tugging at his collar, but when Lydia walked down the short aisle toward him, his face lit up with such joy that she felt her own smile grow to match his. The preacher was long-winded, droning on about duty and obedience in a way that made Lydia's shoulders tighten, but when it came time for the vows, Marcus spoke his clearly and firmly, his eyes never leaving hers. I, Marcus Garrett, take you, Lydia Graham, to be my wife. I promise to love you and honor you, to stand beside you in good times and bad, in sickness and in health, for as long as we both shall live. I promise to be faithful and true, to support your dreams, and to build a life with you that is full of joy and meaning. I promise to be the man you deserve, every single day for the rest of my life. Lydia's voice shook when it was her turn, but she meant every word. I, Lydia Graham, take you, Marcus Garrett, to be my husband. I promise to love you and honor you, to stand beside you through whatever life brings us. I promise to trust you with my heart, even though that is the hardest thing I have ever done. I promise to build a home with you, to be your partner and your friend, and to love you more with each passing day. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Marcus kissed her with such enthusiasm that several people in the congregation laughed, and Lydia felt her face flush hot even as she kissed him back, her hands gripping the lapels of his new suit. They had a simple reception at the boarding house with cake and lemonade, and a fiddler who played dancing tunes while the guests ate and talked. Marcus's mother, Helen, was a warm woman with her son's blue eyes and a smile that made Lydia feel instantly welcome. She hugged Lydia tightly and whispered in her ear that she was so glad Marcus had found someone who made him so happy, and Lydia felt tears prick at her eyes at the simple acceptance of it. Marcus's stepfather, Thomas, was quieter but no less kind, shaking Lydia's hand with a firm grip and telling her that Marcus was a good man who would treat her right. Several of the men from the Double R Ranch had come as well, sunburned cowboys in their best clothes, and they teased Marcus mercilessly about being a married man now, while congratulating him with obvious sincerity. As the sun began to set, Marcus swept Lydia up into his arms despite her laughing protests, and carried her out to the wagon he had borrowed for the occasion. They were spending their wedding night at a small hotel in Holbrook, a town about 30 miles east, before returning to Winslow and the little house they had rented on the outskirts of town. It was not much, just 2 rooms and a kitchen, but it was theirs, and Lydia had spent the past week making it into a home, hanging curtains she had sewn, and arranging the few pieces of furniture they had acquired. The ride to Holbrook was quiet and peaceful, the wagon rattling over the rutted road while the stars came out one by one overhead. Marcus drove with one hand, the other holding Lydia's, and they sat close together on the wagon seat, not talking much, but not needing to. Everything that mattered had been said already, in vows spoken before God and witnesses, in the promises they had made to each other over the past months, in the simple fact that they were here, together, married. The hotel room was small but clean, with a large bed covered in a quilt and a window that looked out over Holbrook's quiet main street. Marcus carried their bags in and then turned to Lydia, suddenly looking uncertain in a way she had never seen from him before. "Are you nervous?" she asked softly. "A little," Marcus admitted. "I want this to be good for you. I want everything to be perfect." Lydia crossed to him and took his hands in hers, looking up into his face. "It will be perfect because it is us," she said, "because you are kind and good, and because I love you more than I thought it was possible to love anyone." "I love you too," Marcus said, and then he kissed her, slow and deep, and everything else fell away. They learned each other that night, with patience and care and a tenderness that made Lydia weep with the beauty of it. This was nothing like her first marriage, nothing like the rough, selfish encounters she had endured. This was two people giving themselves to each other freely, with joy and trust and love. Marcus was gentle and attentive, watching her face, asking if she was all right, making sure she was with him every step of the way. And Lydia found herself opening to him like a flower to the sun, all the fear and shame from her past burning away in the heat of their connection. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the big bed, the quilt kicked down to their feet, and talked in whispers until they fell asleep in each other's arms. Lydia woke once in the night and lay listening to Marcus breathe, his arm heavy and warm across her waist, and felt such a wave of gratitude and happiness that she had to press her face into the pillow to muffle her tears. They returned to Winslow 2 days later, and life settled into a new rhythm. Marcus continued to work at the Double R Ranch, leaving before dawn and returning at sunset, dusty and tired, but always with a smile for Lydia. She took up her sewing again, building back her client list, and found that being Marcus's wife had actually improved her reputation rather than damaged it. The respectable women of Winslow felt safer bringing their mending to a married woman, and Lydia's business thrived. In the evenings, they would eat the dinner Lydia had prepared and then sit together on the porch, watching the sun set over the desert while Marcus told her about his day and Lydia shared the small news of the town. Sometimes Marcus would read aloud to her, his deep voice giving life to stories of adventure and romance. Sometimes they would just sit in comfortable silence, holding hands, content in each other's presence. Winter came, mild by Eastern standards, but cold enough that they were grateful for the wood stove and the thick quilts on their bed. Christmas was celebrated simply, with a small tree that Marcus cut from a juniper on the ranch, and gifts they had made for each other. Lydia had sewn Marcus a new shirt from soft cotton with careful stitches and buttons carved from horn. Marcus had made her a sewing box from smooth wood with compartments for her threads and needles, and a lock of his hair tied with ribbon tucked inside, which made her laugh and cry at the same time. As the new year turned, from 1883 to 1884, they settled deeper into their life together. Marcus was saving every penny he could spare, adding to the fund he had been building for years, working toward the dream of his own ranch. Lydia helped where she could, taking on extra sewing projects and spending carefully, making their money stretch as far as possible. They talked endlessly about the future they were building together, the house they would have someday, the children they both wanted. Spring arrived with a riot of wildflowers across the desert, and with it came news that changed everything. Marcus came home one evening with a strange expression on his face, excitement and nervousness warring for dominance. "There is a place," he said without preamble, catching Lydia around the waist and spinning her in a circle, "about 10 miles north of here. Good grazing land with a creek that runs year-round. The man who owned it died without heirs, and the bank is selling it for back taxes. It is not large, only 160 acres, but it is enough, Lydia. It is enough to start." "How much?" Lydia asked, her heart beating fast. "More than we have," Marcus admitted, setting her down but keeping his hands on her waist. "But not so much more that we cannot manage it. If we use everything we have saved, and if I can get a loan from the bank for the rest, we can do this. We can have our own place." "Then let's do it," Lydia said, not even hesitating. Marcus searched her face. "Are you sure? It will be hard at first. We will have to build a house, and I will need to buy stock, and there might not be much money for other things for a while." "I am sure," Lydia said firmly. "This is what we have been working toward. This is our future." The next week was a flurry of activity. Marcus met with the banker, a stuffy man named Mr. Kincaid, who looked skeptical when Marcus first proposed the loan, but gradually warmed as he reviewed Marcus's work history and savings. With Lydia sitting beside him, her hand in his, Marcus made his case with quiet passion, explaining his plans for the ranch, his experience with cattle and horses, his determination to make it succeed. In the end, Mr. Kincaid agreed to the loan, though the interest rate was higher than Marcus would have liked. They signed the papers on a bright March morning, and suddenly they were landowners. Marcus took the day off work, and they rode out to see their property. Marcus on his own horse, and Lydia on the gentle mare he had bought for her as a wedding present. The land was everything Marcus had promised: rolling hills covered in grass that would feed cattle, cottonwood trees clustered along the creek, and a view that stretched for miles in every direction. There was no house, only the crumbling remains of a line shack that would need to be torn down and rebuilt. But to Lydia, it looked like paradise. "What should we call it?" Marcus asked, dismounting and helping Lydia down from her horse. "Call what?" "The ranch. Every spread needs a name." Lydia thought for a moment, looking out over their land, then smiled. "The Grateful Heart Ranch," she said, "because I am grateful every day for the life we have built together and for you." Marcus pulled her into his arms and kissed her soundly. "The Grateful Heart Ranch it is." They spent every spare moment over the next months working on their land. Marcus's boss at the Double R, a gruff man named Henry Roberts, was understanding about the situation and even offered to let Marcus continue working part-time while he got his own place established. Other cowboys from the Double R came out on Sundays to help, and Marcus's stepfather Thomas brought his carpentry skills to the project of building a house. It was not a large house, just 4 rooms and a porch, but it was solid and well built, with windows that let in light and a stone fireplace that would keep them warm in winter. Lydia sewed curtains for every window and made quilts for the beds, pouring all her skill and love into creating a home for them. They moved in on a sweltering day in July of 1884, exactly 1 year after Marcus had first knocked on her door with soup in his hands. That night, lying in their new bed, in their new house on their own land, Marcus pulled Lydia close and kissed her temple. "Thank you," he said softly. "For what?" "For trusting me, for taking a chance on us, for building this life with me." "Thank you for bringing me soup," Lydia said, only half joking. "Thank you for seeing me when no one else did. Thank you for loving me." "I will love you until the day I die," Marcus said seriously, "and probably beyond that too, if there is any justice in the universe." Lydia kissed him, deep and sweet, and they made love in their new house with the desert wind sighing through the open windows and the stars bright overhead. The ranch grew slowly but steadily. Marcus bought cattle, starting with a small herd that he gradually built up through careful breeding and good management. He had a gift for it, a way with animals that meant his stock thrived where others struggled. Lydia continued her sewing, though now her clients had to ride out to the ranch to see her, which some did and some did not. She found she did not mind the loss of income as much as she might have. The ranch was doing well enough to support them, and she was busy enough helping Marcus and keeping the house. In the fall, Lydia realized she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks, but had not wanted to say anything until she was sure. When she finally told Marcus, he reacted exactly as she had hoped he would, whooping with joy and picking her up and spinning her around until she laughingly begged him to stop before she got sick. "A baby," he kept saying, his hand pressed reverently against her still flat stomach. "Our baby." "Are you hoping for a boy or a girl?" Lydia asked. "I do not care even a little bit," Marcus said honestly. "As long as the baby is healthy and you come through it all right, I will be the happiest man alive." The pregnancy was not easy. Lydia was sick for the first few months, barely able to keep anything down, and Marcus worried constantly. He brought her crackers and weak tea, held her hair when she was ill, rubbed her back when she ached. As she grew larger, he insisted she rest more, taking over more of the household chores himself, even though he was exhausted from the work on the ranch. "You are going to spoil me," Lydia protested one evening as Marcus served her dinner in bed. "Good," Marcus said firmly. "You are growing our child. You deserve to be spoiled." Their son was born on a cold night in March of 1885, with Helen attending as midwife and Marcus pacing anxiously outside the bedroom door. It was a long labor, nearly 20 hours, and there were moments when Lydia thought she might not survive it. But Helen was skilled and calm, and when the baby finally arrived, red-faced and squalling, Lydia felt such a rush of love and relief that she burst into tears. Marcus came in at Helen's call, his face white with worry that turned to wonder when he saw the baby in Lydia's arms. He sat carefully on the edge of the bed and touched one finger to the baby's tiny hand, and when those little fingers curled around his, tears started running down his weathered cheeks. "He is perfect," Marcus whispered. "You are perfect. Thank you, Lydia. Thank you for this gift." They named him Matthew Samuel Garrett, after Marcus's father and Lydia's brother, who had died as a child. Matthew was a good baby, healthy and strong-lunged, and he transformed their lives in ways both wonderful and exhausting. Marcus was a devoted father, taking over night feedings when he could so that Lydia could rest, walking the floor with Matthew when he was fussy, changing diapers without complaint. Watching him with their son made Lydia fall even more deeply in love with her husband, if such a thing were possible. The ranch continued to grow. With the loan paid off and the cattle herd increasing, they were finally making a profit, and Marcus hired a young cowboy named Billy to help with the work. This freed up more of Marcus's time to spend with Lydia and Matthew, and they settled into a routine that felt right and good. Marcus would rise early to check the cattle and do the morning chores, return for breakfast with Lydia and the baby, work through the middle of the day, and come home in time for dinner and the evening. Sundays were sacred, a day of rest when they would go to church in Winslow and then spend the afternoon together as a family. Matthew grew from a baby into a toddler, bright-eyed and curious, with his father's blue eyes and his mother's dark hair. He was fearless in the way of small children, constantly getting into things and needing to be rescued from his own adventurous spirit. Marcus built him a small rocking horse, and Lydia sewed him clothes, and they both delighted in every new word, every new skill, every moment of their son's development. When Matthew was 2, Lydia found herself pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was easier, perhaps because she knew what to expect, or perhaps because she was not trying to do as much. Their daughter was born on a beautiful May morning in 1887, arriving so quickly that Helen barely made it in time. She was tiny and perfect, with a cap of golden hair and eyes that would eventually turn the same color as her father's. "She looks like an angel," Marcus said, cradling her in his large hands with infinite care. "Then we should give her an angel's name," Lydia said. "What about Grace?" "Grace Elizabeth Garrett," Marcus said, trying it out. Elizabeth was Helen's middle name, and his mother wept when they told her. "It is perfect." With 2 small children, life became busier than ever. Marcus hired another hand for the ranch, an older cowboy named Jim, who was steady and reliable, and Lydia found herself grateful for Helen's help as she navigated the challenges of raising 2 children under 3. There were days when she was so tired she could barely keep her eyes open, days when she wondered if she would ever feel like herself again. But there were also moments of such piercing joy that they took her breath away. Matthew's belly laugh when Marcus tickled him, Grace's tiny hand curled around Lydia's finger, the 4 of them sitting together on the porch as the sun set, a family complete and whole. The ranch prospered. By 1890, they had expanded their herd significantly and bought an additional 80 acres of land adjacent to their property. They built a proper barn and a bunkhouse for the ranch hands, and Marcus even talked about someday building a bigger house, though Lydia was content with what they had. The modest house they had built together still felt like home, full of love and laughter and the everyday chaos of family life. Matthew started school in Winslow that fall, riding in with Marcus 3 days a week. He was a bright child, quick to learn, and Lydia found herself thinking about Marcus's long-ago suggestion that she could teach. Perhaps when Grace was older, when things were more settled, she could open a small school on the ranch for the children in the area. It was something to dream about anyway, a possibility for the future. The future seemed full of possibilities. Marcus and Lydia had built something real and lasting from the ashes of their separate pasts, a life that was better than either of them had dared to hope for. They still had challenges, of course. There were droughts that made water scarce and winters that were harder than expected. There were sick cattle and broken fences and all the thousand small disasters that come with ranch life. But they faced everything together, side by side, partners in every sense of the word. On their 10th wedding anniversary in September of 1893, Marcus gave Lydia a locket on a gold chain. Inside were tiny photographs of Matthew and Grace, their serious little faces looking out at her. She cried when she opened it, overcome with emotion, and Marcus pulled her into his arms and held her close. "I have been thinking," he said, his voice rumbling in his chest beneath her ear, "about that first summer when you were so sick and I brought you soup every day. Do you remember?" "Of course I remember," Lydia said. "How could I forget? You saved my life." "You saved mine too," Marcus said. "Maybe not in the same way, but just as truly. I was drifting before I met you, Lydia. I had my plans and my dreams, but they were abstract, something for someday. You made them real. You made everything real." Lydia pulled back so she could see his face. "I love you," she said. "I love you more now than I did when we married, which I would not have thought possible. Every day with you is a gift." "Every day with you is everything," Marcus said, and kissed her with all the passion and tenderness of a man who had loved the same woman for 10 years and would love her for 50 more if he were given the chance. They made love that night with the door locked and the children asleep down the hall, taking their time, relearning each other's bodies with the ease of long familiarity and the excitement of desire that had not faded with time. Afterward, lying in the darkness with Marcus's heartbeat steady beneath her palm, Lydia thought about how far they had both come. From a sick woman alone in a cabin and a cowboy with more kindness than sense, to this, a family, a home, a love that had been tested and proven true. Life continued its steady rhythm. Matthew grew into a lanky boy who loved the ranch and wanted nothing more than to be a cowboy like his father. Grace was quieter, more bookish, with a love of learning that delighted Lydia and made her even more determined to eventually open that school. Marcus's hair began to show threads of silver at the temples, and Lydia found faint lines appearing at the corners of her eyes when she looked in the mirror. They were growing older together, building a history in the lines of their faces and the calluses on their hands. In 1895, Lydia did open her school, starting with just Matthew and Grace and 3 children from neighboring ranches. She taught them reading and arithmetic, history, and geography, all the things her father had taught her so long ago in Missouri. Marcus built her a small schoolroom attached to the house, with a blackboard and desks and shelves for books. Watching her teach, her face alight with passion and purpose, Marcus felt his heart swell with pride and love. More children came. By 1897, Lydia was teaching 12 students, and the little schoolroom was bursting at the seams. Ranchers from miles around brought their children to be educated by the woman who had once been just a seamstress living alone on the edge of town, who had been saved by a cowboy's soup and his steady heart. The school became known throughout the region, and Lydia gained a reputation as an excellent teacher, patient and kind, but with high standards. Marcus and Lydia talked sometimes about having more children, but it never seemed to happen. They were content with Matthew and Grace, who were growing into fine young people, strong and kind, and full of potential. Matthew was already working the ranch alongside his father at 14, and Grace at 12 was helping her mother teach the younger students. They were a family, complete and happy. The turn of the century brought changes. Winslow was growing, becoming more civilized, with new buildings and businesses appearing regularly. The wild west of their youth was slowly being tamed, though the desert and the ranch life remained much the same. Marcus was in his early 40s now, still strong and capable, but feeling his age more than he once had. The ranch was well established, profitable enough that they could afford hired hands to do most of the heavy work, but Marcus still spent long days in the saddle, unable to give up the life he loved. Lydia's hair had streaks of gray now, and she wore spectacles when she was sewing or reading, but she was still beautiful to Marcus, still the woman he had fallen in love with all those years ago. They had been married nearly 20 years, and the love between them had only deepened with time, growing roots that went down to bedrock, unshakable and true. In the spring of 1902, Matthew announced that he was in love. The girl was Sarah Henderson, granddaughter of Mrs. Henderson from the general store, a sweet-faced young woman who loved the ranch life and did not mind the hard work that came with it. Marcus and Lydia gave their blessing, and the wedding was held that summer, a joyous occasion with half of Winslow in attendance. Watching his son marry reminded Marcus of his own wedding day, of how nervous and hopeful he had been, of how Lydia had looked walking down the aisle toward him. He found her hand during the ceremony and squeezed it, and when she looked at him with tears in her eyes, he knew she was thinking the same things. "Our baby is all grown up," she whispered. "We did well with him," Marcus whispered back. Matthew and Sarah built a small house on the far corner of the Grateful Heart Ranch, and suddenly Marcus and Lydia were not just ranchers, but the patriarch and matriarch of a growing family legacy. The thought was both strange and wonderful, a reminder of how much they had built together from nothing. Grace went away to a teaching college in Tucson when she was 18, the first in the family to pursue higher education. Lydia wept when she left, proud and heartbroken in equal measure, but Grace came back 2 years later with a teaching certificate and a quiet young man named David Larson, who she introduced as her fiancé. David was a fellow teacher, earnest and intelligent, and though Marcus grumbled about losing his daughter, he could see that David made Grace happy, and that was what mattered. They were married in 1904, and David joined Lydia in running the school, which had grown large enough to need 2 teachers. Together, they expanded it further, adding upper-level classes, and the school became a real institution in the area, drawing students from as far as 50 miles away. Marcus and Lydia found themselves alone in their house for the first time in over 20 years. It was strange at first, the quiet after so many years of children's voices and activity. But they adjusted, rediscovering each other in the stillness, finding joy in lazy mornings and quiet evenings in the simple pleasure of each other's company. Grandchildren came. Matthew and Sarah had 3 boys in quick succession, rough and tumble children who loved the ranch and their grandfather, who taught them to ride and rope and read the land. Grace and David had twin girls and then a son, quieter children who loved books and learning, but who also thrived in the desert air. Marcus and Lydia's house filled up again on Sundays when the whole family gathered for dinner, 3 generations around the table, talking and laughing and sharing their lives. In 1910, on a warm autumn evening, Marcus and Lydia sat on their porch, watching the sunset as they had done thousands of times before. Marcus was 52 now, his hair more silver than dark, his face deeply lined by years of sun and wind. Lydia was 48, her dark hair streaked with white, her hands showing the effects of decades of sewing and work. They were older, worn by time and life, but they were together, and that was what mattered. "Do you ever regret it?" Lydia asked suddenly. "Taking a chance on me? Bringing me that soup all those years ago?" Marcus looked at her in surprise. "Regret it? Lydia, loving you and building this life with you has been the greatest privilege of my existence. I regret nothing except that I did not find you sooner." "We were so young," Lydia mused. "I was only 23 when you knocked on my door. You were 26. We barely knew ourselves, let alone each other." "And yet here we are," Marcus said, taking her hand. "Nearly 30 years later. Still together. Still in love." "Still in love?" Lydia agreed, leaning her head on his shoulder. "More in love, I think." They sat in comfortable silence as the sky turned from gold to rose to purple, the desert cooling around them. In the distance, they could hear the lowing of cattle, the sound of Matthew's boys playing near the barn. The school was closed for the day, but Lydia could see the light on in the schoolroom, where Grace and David were preparing tomorrow's lessons. The Grateful Heart Ranch stretched out around them, the land they had claimed and tamed and made their own, the legacy they would leave to their children and grandchildren. "What are you thinking about?" Marcus asked eventually. "About soup," Lydia said, and laughed at his confused expression. about how strange it is that a simple act of kindness changed the entire course of both our lives. If you had not brought me that soup, if you had just walked past my cabin like everyone else in town, I probably would have died there alone. And you would have gone on with your life and eventually married someone else and had different children and built a different future. But I did not walk past, Marcus said firmly. I could not have. Something in me knew, even then, that you were important, that you were mine if you would have me. I am yours, Lydia said softly. I have been yours since that first day when you sat beside my bed and fed me soup with such patience and care. I just did not know it yet. And I am yours, Marcus said, raising her hand to his lips and kissing it, forever and always. The years continued to pass, each one bringing its own joys and sorrows. Marcus's mother, Helen, passed away peacefully in her sleep in 1912, and Marcus grieved for the woman who had raised him with such love and who had welcomed Lydia into the family with open arms. Thomas followed her 2 years later, and Marcus and Lydia found themselves the oldest generation, the ones who others looked to for wisdom and stability. The ranch continued to thrive under Matthew's management, with Marcus gradually stepping back from the day-to-day operations. He still rode out most days, unable to give up the habit of a lifetime, but he left the decisions to his son, trusting him to carry on what they had built. The school flourished under Grace and David's leadership, becoming one of the most respected rural schools in Arizona. Marcus and Lydia watched their children succeed and felt the deep satisfaction of seeing their legacy continue. More grandchildren arrived, and then, in time, great-grandchildren. Marcus and Lydia's house became a gathering place for the whole extended family, a place where everyone was welcome, and there was always room for one more at the table. Lydia cooked meals for crowds, drawing on skills learned from decades of ranch life, and Marcus told stories to wide-eyed great-grandchildren about the old days, when Winslow had been little more than a dusty crossroads and the West had still been wild. In the summer of 1920, Marcus and Lydia celebrated their 37th wedding anniversary. They were both in their 60s now, slowing down but still active, still engaged with life. Matthew threw them a party at the ranch, with the whole family in attendance and friends from all over the region coming to pay their respects. There was music and dancing, food and laughter, and speeches about the couple who had built the Grateful Heart Ranch from nothing and raised a family that was now 3 generations strong. Late in the evening, after most of the guests had left, Marcus found Lydia sitting on their porch, watching the stars come out. He sat beside her with a grunt, his knees complaining about the long day, and took her hand in his. "Tired?" he asked. "Happy," Lydia corrected. "Look at what we made, Marcus. Look at all those people in there, all that love and life and family. We made that." "You made it," Marcus said. "You are the heart of this family, Lydia. You always have been." "We made it together," Lydia insisted. "Everything we have, everything we are, we built side by side." Marcus nodded, unable to argue with that. They sat in silence for a while, holding hands, listening to the sounds of their family inside the house, the laughter and conversation that spoke of love and connection. "Do you remember that first soup I brought you?" Marcus asked eventually. "It was chicken and vegetables, with thyme and rosemary. My mother's recipe." "I remember," Lydia said. "I thought you were a hallucination at first, a fever dream. A handsome cowboy appearing out of nowhere to save me seemed too good to be true." "But I was real," Marcus said. "You were real," Lydia agreed. "You are real. And you did save me in every way that matters." "You saved me right back," Marcus said. "You gave me purpose and meaning and a reason to build something lasting. You gave me a family and a home and a love that has sustained me through everything. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Lydia Graham Garrett, and I would do it all again in a heartbeat." Lydia turned to look at him, this man who had been her husband for 37 years, who had seen her at her worst and loved her anyway, who had built a life with her brick by brick and day by day. His face was weathered and lined, his hair white, his hands gnarled from decades of hard work. He was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. "I love you," she said simply. "I will love you for whatever time we have left, and I will love you beyond that, into whatever comes next." "I love you too," Marcus said, "always and forever." They sat together on the porch as the night deepened around them, two people who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful from nothing. The Grateful Heart Ranch stretched out in the darkness, a testament to their love and labor, a legacy that would continue long after they were gone. But for now, they were here, together, and that was enough. That was everything. The years moved forward as they always do, bringing changes both expected and surprising. The 1920s roared even in rural Arizona, bringing new technologies and ideas that transformed daily life. The ranch got electricity in 1924, and Lydia marveled at the electric lights that replaced the kerosene lamps she had used for 40 years. Marcus grumbled about the expense, but secretly loved being able to read in the evenings without straining his eyes. They bought their first automobile in 1925, a Model T that Matthew taught Marcus to drive with more patience than Marcus probably deserved. Lydia refused to learn, declaring that if God had meant her to drive, he would not have given them such fine horses. But she enjoyed riding in the car, especially on Sundays when they would drive into Winslow for church, and then out to see various family members scattered across the region. Age slowed them both. Marcus's knees grew worse, and he finally had to give up riding in 1927, a loss that he mourned deeply. Lydia's hands developed arthritis, making sewing difficult and painful, though she stubbornly continued to teach, finding ways to work around the stiffness in her fingers. They supported each other through these losses, finding new ways to be useful and engaged with life. The stock market crash of 1929 and the depression that followed hit the ranch hard, as it hit everyone. Cattle prices plummeted, and for a few years, it was a struggle to keep things going. But the family pulled together, everyone contributing what they could, and they survived. Marcus said it reminded him of the early days, when every penny counted and nothing could be wasted. He and Lydia had lived through hard times before, and they would live through these too. In 1933, on a cold January morning, Marcus woke with pains in his chest. Lydia immediately sent for the doctor, her heart in her throat, and sat beside him holding his hand while they waited. The doctor confirmed what they had both feared. Marcus's heart was failing, worn out after 75 years of hard use. There was nothing to be done except rest and wait. "How long?" Marcus asked bluntly. The doctor, young enough to be Marcus's grandson, looked uncomfortable. "Hard to say. Could be weeks, could be months. You should get your affairs in order." After the doctor left, Marcus and Lydia sat together in the quiet house. The children had all been called and were on their way, but for now it was just the two of them, as it had been in the beginning. "I am not ready," Lydia said, her voice breaking. "I am not ready to lose you." Marcus pulled her close, his embrace still strong despite his failing heart. "You will never lose me," he said gently. "I will always be with you, Lydia. In this ranch we built together, in our children and grandchildren, in every sunset and every memory. Death cannot touch what we have." "I know," Lydia whispered, "but I want more time. I want 50 more years with you." "So do I, my love, so do I." The family gathered, and Marcus held court from his bed, dispensing advice and blessings and stories. He told Matthew he was proud of the man he had become and the rancher he was, that the Grateful Heart was in good hands. He told Grace that her school was a finer legacy than most people could hope for, and that she should continue to teach and inspire. He spoke to each of his grandchildren and to the great-grandchildren who were old enough to understand, giving them each something to remember him by. To Lydia, he gave everything: his love, his gratitude, his faith that she would be all right without him, even though it broke his heart to leave her. They lay together in their bed, the bed they had shared for nearly 50 years, and talked about everything and nothing. They reminisced about the first time they met, about their wedding day, about the births of their children and the building of the ranch. They talked about the future too, about the family that would continue after they were gone, about the legacy of love they had created. Marcus died on a sunny afternoon in late February, with Lydia holding his hand and the whole family gathered around. His last words were her name, spoken with such love that everyone in the room had tears streaming down their faces. He closed his eyes and breathed out, and then he was gone, leaving a silence that felt like the end of the world. Lydia grieved deeply. For weeks she barely left the house, moving through the rooms like a ghost, unable to believe that Marcus was really gone. The family worried about her, but they also understood. She had lost her partner, her best friend, the love of her life. It would take time to learn how to live without him. Slowly, gradually, Lydia found her way back to herself. She began going to the school again, first just to watch and then to teach a few classes. She started taking meals with her children, letting them draw her back into the flow of family life. She accepted that Marcus was gone but found comfort in the things he had left behind. The ranch still stood, prosperous and strong. Their children and grandchildren thrived. The love they had built together continued to ripple outward, touching everyone around them. On what would have been their 50th wedding anniversary, in September of 1933, Lydia went to Marcus's grave on the small hill behind the ranch house where they had buried him. She brought flowers from her garden and sat beside the headstone, talking to him as though he could hear. "We made it 47 years," she said. "Not quite 50, but close enough. We made it through everything life threw at us, Marcus. We built something beautiful together, and it is still standing. Our family is still strong. The ranch is still here. Your legacy lives on." She was quiet for a moment, listening to the wind in the cottonwoods, the distant sound of cattle. "I miss you every day," she continued, her voice breaking. "I miss your laugh and your kindness, and the way you looked at me like I was the most precious thing in the world. But I am not lost without you, because you taught me how to be strong. You taught me that love is not just a feeling, but an action, something you do every day, through small kindnesses and steady devotion. You taught me that by bringing me soup." Lydia smiled through her tears. "It always comes back to that soup, doesn't it? The soup that saved my life and changed both our futures. Sometimes I think about that sick girl I was, alone and afraid, thinking she was going to die forgotten. And then I look at everything we built from that moment, and I am amazed. From one act of kindness, all of this grew. A love story, a family, a legacy." She stood, her joints protesting, and laid her hand on the sun-warmed stone of his grave marker. "I will see you again someday, my love, but not yet. I still have work to do, people to love, memories to make. You would want me to keep living, to keep finding joy. So that is what I will do, but I will carry you with me every step of the way." Lydia lived for 10 more years, active and engaged until the very end. She continued to teach, to spend time with her ever-growing family, to work in her garden, and take walks across the land she and Marcus had claimed. She told stories about Marcus to anyone who would listen, keeping his memory alive and bright. She made sure the grandchildren and great-grandchildren knew about the man who had built the Grateful Heart Ranch, about his kindness and his strength and his capacity for love. She died peacefully in her sleep in the spring of 1943 at the age of 81. The family gathered for the funeral, 3 generations strong, and laid her to rest beside Marcus on the hill. The headstone read simply, "Lydia Graham Garrett, beloved wife, mother, grandmother, and teacher, the heart of our family, the Grateful Heart Ranch continued, passing to Matthew and then to his children and his children's children." The school that Lydia and Grace had built eventually became part of the public school system, but it kept its name, the Graham School, in honor of the woman who had founded it. The story of Marcus and Lydia became family legend, told and retold at gatherings, a reminder of where they had all come from and the love that had built their legacy. Years turned into decades. The Wild West that Marcus and Lydia had known faded into history, replaced by highways and suburbs and all the trappings of modern life. But the Grateful Heart Ranch remained, a working cattle ranch that still bore the name they had chosen together. And on the hill behind the ranch house, two headstones stood side by side, weathered by time but still readable, marking the resting place of a cowboy and a seamstress who had found each other against all odds and built something that would last forever. The story of how Marcus brought soup to Lydia every day when she was sick and no one else cared became the foundation myth of the Garrett family, passed down through generations as an example of what real love looks like. Not grand gestures or dramatic declarations, but small, steady acts of kindness, showing up every day, taking care of each other through sickness and health, through good times and bad. Building a life together, one small decision at a time, one bowl of soup, one gentle touch, one shared sunset at a time. It was a love story for the ages, born in the Wild West, tested by hardship, and proven true through nearly 50 years of partnership. And it all started with a knock on a door, a pot of soup, and a cowboy who saw a woman in need and decided to help, never knowing that simple act would change both their lives forever. The legacy of Marcus and Lydia Garrett lived on in every person who carried their blood, in every act of kindness their descendants performed, in the very land itself that still bore the name they had chosen together. The Grateful Heart Ranch stood as a monument to their love, a reminder that the greatest things in life often start with the simplest gestures: a bowl of soup, a willing heart, the courage to love and be loved in return. And somewhere, in whatever comes after this life, Marcus and Lydia were together again, holding hands and watching over the family they had created, the legacy they had built, the love that would never die because it had been planted so deep and had grown so strong. They had found each other in the wilderness, two lost souls who became each other's home, and nothing, not even death, could separate them now. They were forever intertwined, forever grateful, forever in love. The end and the beginning, all at once, just as it had been from that very first knock on the door and the soup that changed everything.